And I also like
So good afternoon, our presenter and participants. Welcome to the virtual VIC2021 International Convention 2021. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to thank you so much for your participation and contribution to our annual convention success. We are Hương Nguyễn and Khánh Bùi, the presentation moderators. We are delighted to see all of you in light of virtual presence today, especially in this plenary session. We do hope that all of you will be able to have some valuable knowledge and experience as takeaways following the talk. Before the presentation, there are a few considerations for you. In case you have any questions or concerns about the presentation, please feel free to leave them in the chat box, both in Zoom or on the website, so that we can gather the questions for response in the Q&A session. We are honored to welcome Dr. Nick Saville from Cambridge Assessment English, University of Cambridge, in this 15-minute plenary session, which is entitled Achieving Positive Impact by Design in the Vietnamese Context. Please welcome Dr. Nick Saville. Sorry, Dr. Nick Saville, can you turn on your mic?
The word of the year, unmute. Anyway, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So thank you very much for that introduction. And hello and greetings from Cambridge, England, on a rather cold and dark autumn morning. I'm just having my first cup of tea, and I think you've just had your lunch, I hope. Anyway, I hope the weather is a bit better wherever you are today and that you're enjoying yourself at the conference. Let's get going. So you've seen the topic of my talk. And as you see, it's called Achieving Positive Impact by Design in the Vietnamese Context, as you see on the screen in yellow. And it could be in Vietnamese contexts, plural, very different from the north to the south of a very big country. Also, as you go through my presentation, you will see that the important words of the talk are highlighted in yellow, with some of the key words in red. So yellow and red, does it remind you of anything in the Vietnamese context? From a personal point of view, the first thing to say about the Vietnamese context is it's very nice to be back. Well, sort of back. And I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to come to VIC2021 again. And I was there, just recollecting, 2 years ago exactly in Hue. And that is the beautiful view from my hotel window on the right of the bridges. And it was a great event, which I really enjoyed, including the gala dinner, which I hope some of you also attended last time, which is a great event. So I have a little bit of experience of the Vietnamese context, not a great deal. I've been to the country a few times, and after the event in 2019, I had the opportunity to visit some of the north of the country. The picture on the left is a snapshot I took near Sapa in a very rural area. I wonder what language those two boys were speaking going into the school. And I wonder what they will use in their language classroom when learning English. I hope they, and I think I know that children are learning English in elementary schools now. And on the right in the middle, there's another picture of a Vietnamese classroom, I guess it could be anywhere in Asia. It's very familiar to us all, with children sitting in rows in desks, and probably, I don't know how many you have in your context, 40 children in a classroom, 30 to 40 children, quite a lot of people in one room. So in thinking about the Vietnamese context, I'd like you to reflect on the particular and different aspects of the context that are relevant to your school or college in the parts of the country that you work in. So that's setting the scene for the context. But what's new since I was last with you 2 years ago? Well, I'd like to highlight two important developments that which I think are relevant to the talk, and which I hope you'll see are connected to what I have to say today. The first you will be extremely familiar with. And that, of course, comes as no surprise. It's the COVID emergency and its impact on education, including on language education, and in my case, on language assessment. And of course, the world soon became very familiar with this symbol as the new normal in many parts of the world, which is at home, or at least out of school learning. So not just in the classroom, as we've seen, but elsewhere. And related to that, that reality, which became the sort of overnight reality, we've become accustomed in many parts of the world with the concept of hybridity. And here's a new word for me, hybridization. I don't know whether you can say it, it's quite different. Hybridization. At least one commentator that I've read, and it's on the screen, the reference, characterizes this year 2020 as the year of hybridization. And as you know, hybridity is a concept we've known about for many years. It's the combination of several things, two or more things, to create something new that didn't exist before. So a hybrid plant, a hybrid car, very relevant these days, and now hybrid working at home in the office, and hybrid events like school lessons and indeed academic conferences. This is all virtual, but the other day I was at a hybrid one, some people in the conference room and some people online. And at the heart of the concept of impact by design that I'll be talking about is some combination of humans, usually teachers and learners and others, with educational technology. And the arrival of educational technology, of course, is what enabled us to keep going during the pandemic. The other thing is that this year, particularly in Europe, we're celebrating an important birthday. I don't know whether you can think what that might be, but I think some of you might be aware of it, that this year is the 20th anniversary of the launching of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, Learning, Teaching and Assessment, or CEFR. And here I've highlighted the R for a good reason. It's a frame of reference, originally in two languages, French and English. Now it's available in many languages, and it's designed to be used with all languages. We'll be talking about this in detail, but the key point at the heart of the CFR is that it provides a common basis for many things. So a reference point for the elaboration of syllabuses, curriculum, guidelines, textbooks, of course, examinations and assessment, and also of helping to work with teachers and indeed policymakers. And I'm glad to see we have some on the call today, on the presentation today. The CFR has been very successful beyond Europe, and it's been an evolutionary approach. So what we see today has moved on from 2020. Over the 20 years, we have a toolkit of tools that we have available, and most recently, a companion volume, which has highlighted some of the key original concepts and added in new ones. So the idea of plurilingualism, which is really important, and also the new ways of seeing language as social interaction, mediation, and other forms of social contact. Well, I'll come back to that later. But most importantly, I think for this conference and this talk, is that it's been adapted to meet local contextual needs and preferences. And in this respect, it provides a tool for harmonization and alignment of educational provision in a local context. And the CFR-VN is an excellent example of such adaptation for the Vietnamese context. And we've seen excellent examples also in Japan, now in Taiwan. We have a version which is somewhat different but similar in China with the Chinese standards, and so on. So there's been a movement around having a frame of reference at the very heart of language education. And it's interesting to see here, it mentions foreign languages competencies here, not just English. So this is the project, and I'm very grateful to have been involved in this project, or to have engaged with the leaders, including Ms. Hu, who's on the line. I can see in front of me today, so thank you for coming. As I say, it's been an excellent example of this work, and I know it's already having an impact in your education system. At the heart of the CFR and at the heart of the CFR-VN is the level system. So the traditional A1 to 6 bands adopted and changed to the extent it needs to as a 6-level system. And thank you very much for this graphic. I borrowed it for use in my talk. I like the idea of a ladder or a step that goes from the bottom to the top in a systematic way. So with those points in mind, and with the specific application of them to the Vietnamese contexts, I'd like to now think about the way we collaborate in language education to align all of those different bits. And last time I've talked about the concept of ecosystems of learning, learning-oriented assessment, which are also in this talk, but I'd like to focus on how we put the pieces together to achieve the impacts we want. So how we design a system, an educational system, which achieves the impact that you need in your context, right? Can we use the general ideas to apply to the specific problems and issues? And moving on from that, as I've said, I will be talking about educational technology, and particularly the arrival of AI, educational AI, artificial intelligence, and how we can use that to integrate more effectively learning with assessment so that learners can have a more personalized and socially connected learning experience in their contexts. Right? So it's about doing it together to help the people learn, in our case, English, alongside other languages in their context, in an integrated and systematic way. I see this as sort of like an ambition to create language learning as a lifestyle, not just a school subject. So what we do in life, connecting where we use and learn languages from the home to the school to the university and to the workplace across the lifespan. So not just in school. And I very much like this diagram, which I've stolen again, which shows that in the Vietnam National Foreign Languages Project, you have that progressive implication from kindergarten onwards, and all of the segments being put together. So it involves aligning policy goals on the left with the activities on the right of what we have to do. And that's really at the heart of my message. And it is really important that that collaboration starts in general education, involves tertiary and vocational education, and encompasses continuing education. Obviously, in your context, like many other countries, English is at the heart of it, alongside your national and other languages, but also it's very good to see a plan to include other widely spoken foreign languages, such as Chinese or French, and so on. And French, of course, has a traditional link to your country. So maintaining a multilingual perspective, aligning these macro policy goals to improve what we do to achieve the positive impact by design. Now, this is a concept which many people talk about, impact, but this idea, I think, is one we've developed, particularly in Cambridge, and which I'm sharing with you. And of course, we've developed it around education, which involves language assessment of the kind that we do. And really what I've been concerned about for the last 30 years is how to reduce the negative impact of high stakes exams by making them more learning oriented and aligning them to local contexts in ways which we are talking about today. Of course, at the heart of this is the participants who teach. So improved teacher development, I'm taking for granted, will be part of this picture, although I'm not focusing on it today. So how does this general concept work, and how do we then apply this general concept to your context? So everybody has their context, and at the heart of it is at the center of this diagram, the people who are involved in teaching and learning. So the classrooms that we saw, the teachers and the students who are in it. And our goal is to impact what goes on in those classrooms based on having coherent policy goals, so that that micro level reflects adequately what's intended, and that we can find out whether it's working. So positive impact also involves impact studies in order to challenge whether or not we're achieving our goals. So we do need, in the context, a coherent and comprehensive approach to language education that prioritizes the learning. The aim, I think you'll all agree, put your hands up if you do, is to help people improve their communication skills from the kindergarten onwards, across the lifespan, and for the purposes that society needs. So in education, in the workplace, and for the lives of the citizens in your country. So this is typical, and this is what the CFR was set up to help us with. So learners have to remain at the very heart of this concept, and learning will be what they're doing. So thinking about learning in your context, and in this picture, I've put together a picture of a little girl who's learning a language in primary school, who's also engaging with her national language. She's probably learning other languages or knows other languages in her home or in her local region. And she may well be aspiring to learn more than English. And in order to do so, she's developing a range of competencies around communication skills, so intercultural competence, and what some people call as 21st century skills, the ability to learn, to engage, to be motivated, and so forth. So we have the ambition there of this little girl to become a professional, let's say it's a doctor or health professional, who will need her language skills in order to go through education, but more importantly, the communicative competence in the real world is what she will need as she emerges into her career and through her life. So that, bearing that in mind, how does this work in the Vietnamese context? Well, the starting point to make this happen is a frame of reference. And as I said, you're lucky enough to have one of the kind that we were talking about. So we have the CFR and the CFR-VN mapped together in a systematic way with specific differences studied for the benefit of the Vietnamese context to take into account your local needs. So with those impacts in mind, we can focus on the local context of learning, the schools, colleges, workplace environments, to create a systematic alignment using the standards. If you like, it's every step of the way to support progression, and this is an important word, and it's a kind of learning ladder or learning step way that takes you throughout to the point you need. And of course, in the CFR, it's not necessary to get to the top of the ladder to have useful and endorsable, accessible skills, which are of value. And that's really an important point. So the Vietnam version of the CFR has the same dual functions as the original. It enables clear links between the learning goals and the learning outcomes. It's very much focused on a communicative approach or action-oriented approach, and it provides the basis for lifelong learning. But the toolkit also has the reference levels, which enable us to specify the learning stages more precisely, and also to highlight the nature of the language skills specifically for a particular language and context of use. So reading, listening, speaking, etc. Those are the traditional ones. But the CFR also has put them together in a more interactive way. So perhaps the emergence of the latest version of the CFR is the interactive and mediation skills that are necessary for social action, for an action-oriented approach in the real world. But this is the starting point. So we have that. And of course, we can make sure that in designing our curriculum, those high-level objectives about communication remain central so that we don't get lost in writing content which divorces us from the key focus on learning. So of course, the content will be themes, topics, functions and tasks, which include the specifics of the grammar and vocabulary of English that have to be learned to make progression, and how that's best done in your context is really important. But the tasks at the center have to be based around the concept of developing communication skills. So that's where what we would have called the communicative approach remains at the center of this model. But what about assessment? And that traditionally has been a problem. So you're working across this diagram from the left to right. So the assessment is very big in the picture. But what has traditionally happened is the impact of the assessment has had an impact back into the classroom, back onto the teachers, back onto the way people think. And often this has not been to deliver the high-level objectives, but to deliver knowledge of grammar or vocabulary or the micro-level features of the language, which you're all familiar with in multiple choice tests and quizzes and the like, right? So traditional assessment models. So in order for this to work by design, so the intentions on the left to be delivered as the real world competencies, we must make sure our tests are aligned to the objectives of this vision, right? So that must not be allowed to distort the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve. And tests, as we all know, and particularly high stakes examinations, have a very powerful impact. So it's increasingly important to get it right. So we've been talking about that in my context for a long time, which is if we're trying to develop in the learner the abilities, the dispositions, the competencies that are needed to be a communicating individual in society, so to have the language skills in society, how do we work with the classrooms and other learning contexts to make sure that assessment has a positive impact? And this is the work that we've been doing on learning-oriented assessment. And this is where we have to put the assessment policy into the education policy to make sure we can create that systematic alignment that I've talked about, so that we don't distort the picture. And this is what I've been calling learning-oriented assessment. Others call it that too, but sometimes with a different meaning. And at the heart of that is finding better ways of integrating the assessment into the learning context. And of course, that will vary according to the local conditions, the local policy, the local learning environments, the classrooms, the languages that are spoken, and so on. So what goes into this? Well, we have to keep some vision of learning and assessment as a kind of hand-in-hand opportunity. So if you have a task, you need to be able to give it to the learners to interact with it, to observe it, and to provide feedback. That is a learning and assessment feedback loop, right? And that is what teachers do. It's what we hope will happen when we write educational assessments. So you mustn't lose sight of the nature of the assessment model we want at the heart of it. And we need that to be understood by our teachers, right? So that we can ensure that when they're teaching, they may be teaching grammar or they may be teaching vocabulary, but they don't lose sight of what that grammar and vocabulary is for. And the feedback helps them learn the grammar, but it also helps them use it in their communication. So teaching, learning, and then assessment. Assessment needs also to have that same relationship with what goes on in classrooms vision, so that we can get better alignment. And this is what I'm calling the ecosystem of learning, really, which has assessment built into it rather than added onto it on the side. And the benefits, I think, are for the learners, because they get in this, if this is working, it will help their well-being. They will not be cramming for exams all the time. It will help them to be motivated and interested. And at the heart of the learning model is the ability to see progress being made on what is important in the learning context, what they're required to do. So a vision of why they're learning the language, how it will add benefit to them. And that has to engage them in some way, not just be given to them. And the outcome, of course, is communicative competence in the world, language skills, if you want, which can be deployed for the benefits of society as a whole. So it's a social good if we can achieve it. And that's why you need to think about what the benefits are in your context. So creating a language learning ecosystem in the VN context. So here we are in the picture, in the diagram, still very big in assessment, big yellow box here, but we have to make sure that in designing the exams and designing the assessment, however we do it, that it has the impacts we want. And that means making sure that the tasks for learning and assessment that take place in classrooms are aligned to the framework objectives. So what we can get is formative feedback for learning for all of the needs of learners and professionals in checking progress, in adjusting learning goals and so on. But that also is coherent with an external exam, which doesn't override or dominate this in a negative way, so that this assessment of learning is a value-added component, which is cumulative on top of everything else and not distorting what goes on. So, you know, the prize of having a certificate is very useful. It's very motivating. It's very visible, but it should not distort what goes on further back in the chain. So what we've here done is to bring both parts to have the positive impact on the middle bit, which is the learning and the outcomes. I hope that's kind of clear, because that now is the complete picture of what we try to achieve. So the challenge for all educational systems is to understand how that might work in the first place. But then the second is to actually make it work. So putting such a system into practice requires some theory of action, and bringing the people together who are required in order to do this, to have a common understanding of what's going on. I think everywhere in the world, certainly in your context, it's necessary to provide teacher training and support for the key participants. This is clearly understood in the Vietnamese context, and I know that teacher training and other training programs are underway that derive from the national strategies and that use the reference framework as a way of elaborating common understandings and kind of common basis. Understanding the learning and assessment cycle at the heart of the design of tasks for learning purposes or assessment purposes, sometimes for whether it's for assessment for learning or assessment of learning, is, I think, a challenge, and it is getting people to have a grasp for this is necessary if we want to achieve the positive impact. A perennial challenge, of course, is a practical and logistical one, and it has to do with resources and the realities of classrooms and the lives of teachers. So we saw 2 pictures of classrooms at the beginning, and we shouldn't lose sight of that in your context or in any context, that this hypothetical or theoretical model has to be made to work. So this is a picture taken from the learning-oriented assessment model, which is learner-centric, really. What about putting it into practice? Well, I think there have been some opportunities, which I've recently seen in the last year or so, about the future, about making this happen in the future. Hybrid education, I think, is part of that, and the new horizons offered by educational technology, plus the emerging acceptance of how we can use specific types of AI to support this. So we use the educational technology which existed in 2019 to respond to the emergency in 2020. And that has been helpful. How can we use this opportunity to build out for the future? So I think that, you know, something has changed in the last 2 years, which has created a window of opportunity to make progress in our ambition for integrated learning and assessment. And the general acceptance that people need technology in order to learn has been just the reality that we've had to deal with. The arrival of hybrid and at home puts the challenge of using EdTech at the center of our concerns. And we've moved forward, I think, quite a lot in a very short period. The use of EdTech in learning, as we've argued for some time, can enhance features that are known to be effective in language learning and in the context of the positive impact model in particular, such as the localization of content to the context, the individualization of topics and preferences, and personalized learning pathways that incorporate formative feedback for learning in a timely way throughout a learning journey. And we haven't been able to do that in-person classrooms with 40 or 50 children. The personalization of learning is very difficult in that context. Of course, there are associated concerns emerging around the uses and misuses of this technology, and particularly the data that it generates. And this is a challenge for the policymakers and for the practitioners. So remote proctoring, this is a new word for many people, became important in the exams world. remote proctoring solutions are necessary, and they often use artificial intelligence techniques to observe candidates while they respond to assessment tasks out of school or out of the exam room, which could be at home in your bedroom. So it takes this necessary type of test security and observation to detect unauthorized behaviors very much into people's lives. And this necessary component has raised concerns about privacy, the collection uses of data. And some people even feel it's a form of surveillance, of really, you know, a shift in power of how people are monitored in their own homes. So there are ethical concerns. I won't go into it, but the opportunity is that people are now using these types of technology much more regularly, and it's become part of the debate, at very much at the heart of the debate in many parts of the world. So the challenges are both technical and social, of course. And the biggest social problem, I think, everywhere has been what we're calling the digital divide, the uneven availability of the technology in people's lives, and the disparities of those who have it versus those who haven't got it has been quite noticeable in the last year and a half. But even before the pandemic, the daily reality for millennials and school children involved in education was engagement with digital technology in some form, and particularly smartphones and tablets. And we could call them the fourth industrial era kids, really. So it's a normal thing for the kids. But for many parents and educationalists, this has been not a cause for celebration, but a cause of concern and doubt about whether these sort of devices should actually be in the home or in the school context. So I think in thinking about positive impact by design, we have to take control of this. And by addressing societal resistance and harnessing the potential of these mobile phones and mobile devices, we can now explore ways to move from traditional systems of the kind which are known to have negative impact to more redefined learning-oriented systems that seek to integrate the learning and assessment more effectively by design. And exploiting the technology with the AI will be necessary for the purpose. So we have to grasp the problem and deal with it if we want to take advantage of that. And if we do, we can address this new key challenge of to extend the use of technology into educational context, to collect and use data, information about learners, how they respond to tasks, how they do things when they're learning, in order to build redefined or transformed models of learning and assessment, which were previously not possible, right? So moving beyond the traditional paper and pencil classroom-based or exam-based models we're familiar with. And this really is what I'm talking about to build the ecosystem model. We're going to need the technology. If we do, we can design ways in which all different sorts of information obtained from tasks can be used to support learning. So, you know, whether it's teacher-based assessment or practice tests, which lead towards certification, they all aligned in a productive way. So to empower learners to take more control of their own learning in their own context, giving them, if possible, greater autonomy and productive time on learning tasks, potentially at times and places that are convenient for them and their teachers and family, inside and outside classrooms, joined together systemically. If we can address this macro challenge of social acceptance and issues like affordability and access to the internet, we can find many different and innovative ways to integrate learning and assessment, which we can investigate to see whether they achieve the impact we want, which we've designed into the system. Already, I think we can take advantage of the new normal, as we're calling it. And here is a good example of a modification to existing tasks that adds real benefits immediately. And that is the assessment of speaking using video conferencing, right? What are we doing now? Well, this is the new normal. The general use of video conferencing in daily life and applications such as Zoom being used routinely in education as well as in the home has now enabled this form of authentic communication to be exploited for learning and assessment tasks. So it's now possible to assess interactive speaking skills based on the model of a face-to-face conversation, but in a virtual way. So we can look at authentic, collaborative, and interactive language use, right? And those three young ladies there are all in different rooms, potentially in their own contexts, interacting with a teacher or examiner somewhere else, could be anywhere in the world, in order to take advantage of what is now the new normal. And this isn't the future of AI. This is just the future of the EdTech, which we now have available to us. But at the heart of it is the idea that by using the technology, we become more familiar with it, and then we can extend it in a much more transformative way than we've been able to in the past. And it can sit at the heart of our integrated system of the kind I painted with all the yellow boxes. And that leads me really to my conclusion and final thought. I'd return to the CFR 20 years on and highlight the goal that's central to language learning as set out in the recent companion volume in yellow. So what we're looking for are learners as social agents with plurilingual repertoires who have the social abilities to deploy their language in the community they live in. And that's the picture of the CFR volume. We need to design our systems with this impact in mind and to continually adjust and improve our practices to find better ways to achieve it together in our own context, in your context, in Vietnam. And we need to set up research models that can enable us to both design the impacts and then investigate them in practice. So we need more impact studies of the kind actually we're thinking about doing in Vietnam. So thank you for listening. That's the end of my talk. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat.
Thank you, Dr. Saville, very much. Yeah, thank you for a wonderful presentation. So we have a lot of questions in the chat now. So could you please let me share the screen so that you can see all the questions here? Yeah.
Shall I end my show?
Sorry?
Shall I end my show? Shall I end the PowerPoint?
Yeah, please, so that I can share the questions for you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. And stop sharing. Have I stopped sharing?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, please.
Stop sharing. Where is the? There it is.
Thank you so much. So now you can see we have a lot of questions for you actually. So I just chose a couple of questions we have here. So the first questions I have here for you is, I want to use the CAFR in my school, New Hope, Cambodia, especially in the placement test. Can I? Yeah. So that's the first question you have.
Well, I mean, the answer is yes. But my question is, what do you want to use it for in designing a placement test? What bits of it? And I think that's the point. It's a tool of reference which can be used by anybody. So you can take the original version, 2021, And you can find the bits that help you. Or you can look now at the companion volume and find the bits that help you. The companion volume is particularly useful because it has extended the range of descriptors, particularly for use in school and for younger learners at the pre-A1 level. So that may be something which is useful to you to use as a reference. What you would be wanting to do is to work out what you need to assess in order to place somebody in your school. And that would be what skills or what language use, and also what level of proficiency is necessary. And you'd need to be able to design a test based on that. The CFR can be helpful, but you'd also need to look into the theory of language testing. It's not a book which helps you to do language testing.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answer. So I have another question here for you. Sorry, the audience have another question here for you. So how can I use this CFR to fit the context of my school, focusing on preschool for preschoolers and English for specific purposes for youth?
Well, you have your own version, Vietnamese version, and it will be necessary to look into what it says about the levels and the content needed for school, and that will be starting in kindergarten, I suppose, or probably in year 1 of elementary school. I think the CFR doesn't really say anything about toddlers and children preschool. Basically, what it would, I think it would be saying is that if you want learners to learn, you have to get them to socialize in using language in reality. So focusing on real life context. In what way can you acclimatize a child to using language for communication? Very much now people are seeing this as a plurilingual opportunity. So if you want to learn English, you need, in particularly at that age, to encourage learners to maintain and develop their own languages. And that could be the home language, their dialect, like the children from Sapa, or it could be the national language, like the national language of Vietnam, alongside English. So you need to create the idea of language as communication from an early age for preschoolers. English for specific purposes for youth depends on what purpose, and that really means picking out the kind of can-do model of what they need to be able to do and designing learning objectives and learning outcomes around those tasks and those skills that are necessary for that purpose. Obviously, things like content, themes, domains of use would need to be relevant to youths, and I suppose you mean older teenagers, and that would be potentially, making sure they can have access to the technology they like to use in order to encourage them to learn.
Yeah, thank you so much. So here's another question. In Vietnam, we have learning outcomes for grade 5, grade 9, and maybe they said grade 12. That is level 1, level 2, level 3 respectively. So how about learning outcomes for grade 6, 7, 8, and grade 10 and 11 according to CFR? Yeah.
Well, how about it? Yeah, how about it? Why not? I mean, I'm not sure I understand the question. We don't have them. Should we have them? I think is a policy question. Could we do it? Yes. Once you have a frame of reference, you can decide which grades of schooling are going to have particular outcomes and what elements of the framework are going to be used to design those outcomes, right? So obviously you need the learning objectives before you can have the learning outcomes. So go back into the policy, go back into the documents and look and see how it could be done. I think that's perfectly possible. Whether it will happen, you need to ask the policymakers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Saville, for answering all the questions. Actually, we have a lot of questions for you. So the audience, for the rest of the questions, for the limited of time, we are sorry that we cannot pause on the questions here. So for the rest of the questions, could you please email Dr. Saville so that he can address your questions? Thank you everyone very much. Yeah, so I give it over to Ms. Hương. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for participating in this great plenary presentation. On behalf of VIC 2021, we wish you all the best with the productive day and meaningful rest of our virtual convention. And it is now time for you to move to the concurrent pre-recorded sessions, and our presenters are available there to discuss with you in the format of Q&A or chat. Yeah, and we will have 30 minutes for concurrent pre-recorded session. Thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.